Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly roundup. Today we'll cover interest rates, economic outlook, and earnings releases. Hello, Ben.
Hey, Eva.
Good week.
Good week so far. I think we should tell everybody that we are recording on Thursday. So
Oh, yeah.
anything that happens tomorrow won't be commented on, but we are recording Thursday so we can release it tomorrow. But yeah, good week. How about you?
Good week. It's a white week this week.
That's very true. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's pretty, but cold.
Yeah, but cold. Okay, let's get right into it. Quite a bit of interest rate related news this week. Fed Weller is anticipating a rate cut in December, and Bank of England's Bailey also mentioned a number of rate cut next year. What does this mean for the global economies in the near term?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot happening in interest rate land and inflation land to your point. So I'll try to cover, there's a couple slides that I want to bring in where we can talk about that in a little bit more depth. But I'd say in general, if you look at what's been happening with the news and in North America and Europe, that's for sure, is inflation continues to come down. And so if inflation continues to come down, and the economies in those places are slowing, particularly Canada and Europe, and, and some political unrest, which we can comment on a little bit in France. So I think all of these things are pointing towards lower rates. And I think the pace at which those rates come down are really going to be contingent on how the economy continues to do here, as it does look like it's sputtering in many parts, with the exception of the US, which continues to it looks like be able to maintain a little bit of economic expansion, but certainly still pointing towards rates down, inflation down globally.
Okay. Speaking of France,
Mm.
French lawmakers are planning on holding a vote of no confidence. What is the impact on this on economic growth and outlook for France?
So it actually proceeded, and they are kicking out the current prime minister. He was in the job for 4 months, which is ludicrous. The last time this happened, where there's non-confidence vote, was, I believe, something like 1962 in France. So it would have been under like Charles de Gaulle, like a long time ago. So it's fascinating, but it just really shows you the issues that we're having in the world, because if you recall what happened in France in the elections 4 months ago, there was they do multiple rounds of voting, as you know. In this first round, Marine Le Pen, who was right wing, kind of led, and they thought she was going to take over. And then in the second wave of voting, it was more neutral, and she didn't get as much power as she anticipated. They have a semi-presidential system there. So Macron is still in the president, and so he's president till 2027. And so he put Bernier in the position. He tried to pass a budget, and it was an austerity budget. So there's a couple things that's happened. Macron pushed retirement age from 62 to 64, and that brought France into chaos. And then this particular budget was an austerity budget, trying to get their debt to GDP in line with what the EU's regulations are. And then Le Pen and the left wing, which I don't recall the leader's name there, they decided to work together to effectively take the gentleman out. And so it is a mess in France. There is something in the French rules that allow Macron to step in and make decisions. There's this Article 16 that he could implement, and likely be able to pass a 2025 budget without approval from the political parties and without a prime minister. Uh, but no doubt it is a mess, but really shows you just really the political unrest globally. I know we talked, or I did at least the last couple of years, talked a little bit about the fourth turning with Neil Howe. Presently reading his new book, which came out last year, but getting into a bit more detail on it. And it effectively talks about some of these types of events that we're seeing, which is just massive political unrest and austerity type of thinking is just making people extremely upset. And I think France is a good example of what happens and what can happen. And the short answer is it's a mess. They need to figure something out and get a leader in place. And likely what will happen is Macron will step in and put a budget in place and find a leader. But there's going to be some chop. But further points to the fact that the ECB probably eases more with the knowledge that France is going to be in a bit of turmoil short term.
Okay. President-elect Trump plans to nominate Paul Atkins as
Mm,
SEC chair.
mhm.
What does this potentially mean for the markets generally?
Yeah, so that was a great flag that you noted and followed this gentleman, and he is quite interesting. Comes from Wall Street, of course, just like many of his candidates that he's brought into his party, Trump, that is. Atkins is very pro digital assets. And so he has been quite vocal about his thoughts around digital assets. And, we can certainly maybe a separate deeper dive into what that could mean in a separate recorded call might be worthwhile just to explore it in a bit more detail. But very different than the current SEC chair and pro digital assets, which I think it'll be interesting to see what that means and how it plays out in the US, but certainly very, very positive for digital assets.
Yeah, sounds good. A couple of earnings releases this week. Salesforce, BNS, Marvel,
Mhm.
Technology. Anything worth noting here?
I mean, I think with what we see with most of the tech companies, which happens with Marvel and Salesforce, the talk continues to be around how AI is optimizing their business and or changing their business and or many other things. But those two specifically, Marvel, the market liked it and stock rallied, selling off a bit today. And Salesforce as well, the market liked what they're doing. We use Salesforce in our system, and so I think we understand that it's a massive beast, and if AI can help us use it and understand it and help with our service, I think that'll be a great thing. So certainly positive there. On the banks, Scotiabank, CIBC, Royal Bank, I think they all had earnings this week. Mixed views. Scotiabank is tilted towards emerging markets, so if we get a kind of weakening U.S. dollar, that's probably going to be positive for them. But the two other, Royal Bank and CIBC, I'd say shorter term, the numbers were a little bit better.
Yeah. Anything else catch your eye this week?
I'd say the only other thing really that caught my eye was just the uh, Barrick CEO. There's something going on with their issues in Mali. Mali issued an arrest warrant for him. Interesting to see that some of the countries are starting to attack the executives in the different countries to try to, get them to pay more money and give up rights and things like that. So that I thought was interesting, which I want to delve into a bit more. But nothing really else specific at this point.
Yeah. Any portfolio changes?
No, this week, no. Still of that view where I think the corporates can do quite well, and so it was interesting to see how they track this week. And corporates did well. The government bonds actually had a decent week as well, but in general, no real changes. Continue to review gains and losses, tax reporting, a couple of tax switches for some individual clients that need some tax losses. But portfolio wide, nothing material.
Okay. How about we go into the charts?
Sounds good. All right, you see that? Okay, we are
Yes.
December 5th, and as I mentioned, these are my recommendations and not necessarily those of National Bank Financial. But I'll give you a couple of slides I think worth looking at. This is from our economics team. Um, I'm sure you've seen some of this if you've been following along. There's been a lot of talk about the productivity gap between Canada and the US. And so this was a chart put out by Stefan Marian, our chief economist, just really on the gap. So Canada's productivity gap versus the US. I mean, this is a massive differential. And the secondary to that is business R&D funding is stagnating. And so, as you look at the U.S. Research and development continues to accelerate, it's one of the things that has driven the United States is the technology advancement. We've been stuck really in stall and neutral at this point. And so, if we look ahead for Canada, what are some of the things we need to do? Certainly productivity needs to increase, and we need to find a way to increase our R&D if we're going to accelerate our growth and our presence in the world. And so this is reflective on currency, and then the next one I'll talk a little bit about rates, but rates and currencies tend to go hand in hand. And this is one of the more common questions I get is what's going on with the Canada-US dollar. And certainly we have lots of clients that go down to the US every year. And so this is certainly something that we talk about quite frequently. But if you look at the view, we think Q1 of next year, looking at about 145 US CAD. If you flip that over, that's about 69 cents CAD US. And so just if you're thinking about where we are today versus the potential upside downside, that's what we see happening shorter term. So that when we're making investment decisions, that certainly has an impact on if we're hedged or unhedged and those kinds of things. And if we look at the bottom chart, this is Canadian dollar crosses. So certainly interesting as you potentially look to diversify assets. You want to have some different currencies, or as a potential upside downside. You look at yen, pound sterling, and Mexican peso. These would certainly be areas that I'd have clients own some currency in that level. And so this would be really reflective on rates. And so if we look at this one quite briefly, this is Eurozone, UK, Japan, US, and Canada. And so as we look ahead, and I know you're going to ask me what we see ahead, but some of these are what do we see ahead for the next year? And so what do we see ahead from a rate cut perspective? And so if you look at Canada, we see that on December 11th, which will be next week, there'll be a rate announcement. And presently, we're showing 38 basis points of rate cut. And so really, that's going to be reflective on do we get the full 50 basis points, or does that end up being just a 25? So that'll certainly be worth watching. And then in the US, to your point, Eva, there's another rate announcement coming up there, December 18th. So right now we're only showing 20 basis points likelihood, or 18. So we think rates come down. At least that's what our chief economist does. And then in Europe, you see much more aggressive rate cuts coming. And so I think that answers your question a little bit about what we see happening on that side of things at this point. And so those would be the rate cut expectations charts of the day. Try to keep it simple today, just around really FX and interest rates.
Great. 3 charts.
I stayed within my limit.
Nice. So what's on the agenda for next week?
So certainly rate cuts in Canada we have next week, so that'll be worth watching. The market's been quite resilient this last probably 6-8 weeks. And so we'll continue to watch and see if we have follow through, see if the volumes pick up. The US today is down a little bit, or TSX is up a little bit, about 25 basis points up here today. And so see if there's follow through there, see if stocks continue to move higher. But December can be volatile. So far, it's been quiet to start with. So I'd be watching that narrative quite closely to see what happens from here.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
As always, our clients, please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you'd like to schedule a meeting with Ben. And for everyone, please visit, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn at Hart Investment Group. Thank you for listening. and have a great weekend after you get through Friday.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Take care.